One of the pilots note the large amount of blood on the windows of the aircraft. It seemed that there were no signs of life remaining on the plane. Upon receiving the news, the federal government immediately formed a task force with relevant departments to investigate the incident. Clad in the highest level of chemical protection suits, they opened the cabin door and found that the passengers had turned into skeletons, with their flesh decaying into blood water. Not a single passenger had survived. As the task force began a thorough investigation, they received a call from a security guard, according that they had seen two suspicious-looking individuals near a warehouse. In the early hours of the morning, the detectives who received the tip immediately rushed to the warehouse to look into the matter. They first found several bottles of organs in the trash can, which Anna, after inspecting them, found to contain substances used in the chemical industry. They then opened the warehouse door and began to inspect each storage unit. When they opened one of the storage units, they found various experimental animals and a large number of chemical instruments. Upon seeing this, Anna immediately pulled out her phone to report the situation to her superiors. As John continued to inspect the remaining warehouses, door across him suddenly opened. Seeing the scene in front of, he immediately realized that something was amiss. In the process of his escape, the man pulled out his and pressed a button. Instantly, the warehouses on both sides exploded, and even Anna, not far away, was instantly blasted by the strong impact, gradually falling into unconsciousness. When she woke up, she found herself lying in a hospital bed. Fortunately, the explosion only caused minor abrasions to her, but John, who was with her, was not so lucky. Although he survived the explosion, had been exposed to the drugs developed in the laboratory. Besides burns, his skin also began to gradually become transparent. The doctors were helpless and could only use medication to induce a coma to slow down the progression of the disease. To save her boyfriend's life, Anna researched extensively and found that a professor named Bishop had conducted experiments in the 1970s that were remarkably similar to the conditions on the plane, including those on John. Perhaps he could save John's life and explain everything that happened on the plane. However, due to the professor's assistant being murdered in a laboratory 17 years ago, was charged with intentional murder, but was ultimately ruled mentally unstable and unable to stand trial, while also being prohibited from meeting anyone other than immediate family member. For this reason, Anna found the professor's son, Peter, in a war-torn city. He was a handsome man with an IQ of 190. Due to the charges against Professor B. Sharp, Peter had misunderstood his father and did not want to see him. However, with Anna's persuasive methods, ultimately boarded the flight back with her. In Peter's view, his father was the most arrogant, twisted, and talented jerk on the world. He worked in a basement at Harvard University for a toothpaste company, but Peter couldn't. Do they seek help from such people? However, Anna told Peter his father was not working a toothpaste company. Professor Shaw was actually involved in a military secret experiment, mainly engaging in advanced scientific research, including mental control and instant movement, soul out of body, invisibility, genetic mutation, and resurrection. Although these things seemed like fantasy, was clear from Anna's serious expression that all of this was true. With Peter's help, Anna was able to see Professor Shaw, who had been in prison for 17 years, in a mental hospital. Upon seeing his son, Professor Shaw quickly stepped forward to carefully inspect Peter's pupils. After finding that everything was normal, he breathed a sigh of relief. Due to mental issues, Professor Shaw often experienced intermittent amnesia, but according to Anna's description of John's symptoms, skin had become translucent, indicating that he was in the late stage of a certain disease. However, Professor Shaw had successfully treated the symptom in animals in the early stages of the experiment. As long as he personally saw John, he was confident he could cure him later. With Anna's firm attitude, Professor Shaw obtained approval from John's direct relatives, and along with Anna and others, drove to the hospital where John was located. By this time, John's skin had become completely transparent, and his muscles and internal organs could be seen directly with the naked eye. The professor carefully scraped a sample with a surgical knife and told Anna that he needed to return to his previous laboratory immediately for experiment. After obtaining approval from his superior, they arrived at the laboratory, which had been sealed for 17 years. After carefully examining the equipment there, Professor Shaw told them about the other equipment he needed. Due to the minimal genetic differences between humans and cow, Professor Shaw requested a purebred cow weighing 850 pounds with an average fat content of 237 and aged under 2 years. In fact, this cow was of no use for the experiment, as the professor simply wanted to drink milk. After a series of experiments, the professor confirmed the source of this infectious material. The substances John had been in contact with were merely a chemical reaction produced by the laboratory's raw material. So the professor was confident he could synthesize a counteragent, invited that he had the product catalog from the warehouse. However, everything in the warehouse had turned to ashes in a large fire, and only the unconscious John had seen the suspect's appearance. Based on the speed of crystal condensation on his body, John had less than 24 hours left. Seeing the situation leading to a dead end, Professor Shaw proposed a dangerous idea to Anna, a dream-sharing system. Understand